A steady stream of announcements from the Prime Minister this week about what's going to be in the budget, most of them focused on housing. The feds are pitching plans to improve what they call generational fairness and lower the cost of housing. But much of the government's promised action extends past the next election and requires big buy-in from provinces, many of which have already rejected the conditions the feds want to place on funding. We've got MPs here to debate how to solve the housing crisis. Parliamentary Secretary to the Housing Minister, Chris Biddle, is with us. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer is here, as is NDP housing critic Jenny Kwan. Hi to all of you. Thank you very much for making the time. I appreciate it. Mr. Biddle, I will start with you. Despite the announcements your government is making, the CMHC today put out its forecast for the housing sector. And in each of the next 3 years, it expects housing starts to be fewer than last year, even in their most optimistic scenario. How can you actually convince Canadians your government's policies will make housing more affordable when that's the case?
Absolutely. Well, these announcements address that concern, specifically with respect to low-interest loans. It's something that we've heard from the building industry, the inability to access low-interest capital to get these apartments built that we need to see built. And so it's important the federal government comes to the table with these loans. We're already seeing benefits from the existing loan program, 11,000 built, another 20,000 on the way, and we're going to double that with this program. And so this whole plan is about addressing the roadblocks in the system, and low-interest financing is just one of them. And we're going to see the results from this, and we need to take bold action, and that's what we're doing.
Respectfully, Mr. Biddle, are you making the argument that $18 billion for 11,000 units constructed over the last 7 years is bold?
I'm making the argument that with respect to all the announcements that are being made is bold at all different levels, addressing all the various choke points. With respect to its 30,000 units, an additional 30,000 on the way through the additional announcement. That's 60,000 additional units of housing available. And again, that's just one element of the government's plan. We need to address this at all levels of government, at all orders of government. I know some of the premiers have concerns, but we're going to work with them, as we've done in the past, to come for solutions, because Canadians expect all hands on deck, all levels of government to be working at this, and again, addressing all of the roadblocks in the system. And one of those is, and one of the significant ones is, low-interest financing available to builders, because we haven't seen significant rental units being built in decades in this country, and we're seeing the impacts of that right now.
Respectfully, though, if I could challenge the numbers that you're putting forth, because even if I'm being generous, and everything that you've announced up until the past week and a half is 750,000 units thanks to the Housing Accelerator Fund over the next decade, plus 130,000 through this low-cost financing, which again is through to the end of another decade. You combine that, you're looking at somewhere, if again, I'm being generous, upwards of 1 million new units. The CMHC said there needed to be 3.5 million additional new units by 2030 in order to restore affordability. So again, I understand that you're doing something on supply, but does it necessitate, given the acute nature of the crisis right now, your government looking closer at the demand side and beyond temporary immigration, looking at permanent immigration numbers?
With respect, what we're doing, and again, the immigration minister has spoken with respect to the government's analysis of and what needs to happen with respect to the housing crisis, and that we're going to keep adapting to what we're facing. But on the supply side of things, that's fundamentally important. We're dealing with a supply problem of housing. We still need workers in this country. It's one thing to question immigration levels. We still need people to build the homes. We still need people in our healthcare system. And we have to be adaptable, as one of the issues that we're facing also is a third of skilled tradespeople are going to retire in the next decade. Immigration can be a solution to this on top of other programs that are available. But one thing that we can do, and again, working with other levels of government, we are one level of government. There are many provinces that are interested in working with us and building on those hundreds of thousands of units that you've talked about. But we need other levels of government to step up. We need to work with the private sector to ensure that we reach those targets. We're talking about levels that we need to get to that are historic, but we're going to be there. We're going to have the funds and programs available and get it done.
I want to bring in your other colleagues. Mr. Scheer, I saw on social media your party is critical of what the government has been announcing so far. But I wanted to understand what exactly you're opposing, because what they have announced is largely tying government money to specific outcomes in municipalities and in provinces, exactly what the leader of your party said he'd do if he were prime minister.
Well, not at all. What Justin Trudeau is doing is pouring buckets of gasoline on the fire that he started in the first place. After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, housing costs have doubled, rents have doubled. It now takes the average wage earner 63% of their salary to be able to pay for housing costs. That's a record-smashing level that we haven't seen in this country. And the rebranding and repackaging and recycled announcements that we've seen this week from Justin Trudeau have been shown not to work. His own housing agency has concluded that after 8 years of the very same policies that he's re-announcing today, housing starts are actually going down. The CMHC also blamed high interest rates for the fact that there aren't new rental units being built, and all this borrowing is going to keep those interest rates high. So the Housing Accelerator Fund hasn't built a single home that they can track to the program itself. Housing starts are down. These loan programs that they've announced 8 years ago, there's been less than half of the loans taken out, and after promising 77,000 homes being built, the program actually only delivered 11,000. So with that kind of track record, all this will mean is more debt, higher interest rates, and fewer homes being built.
But to follow up on that, to be fair, there are I think about 48,000 units in total. 11,000 have already been built. The rest are in the process of being built. And again, to my initial question, I'm not sure what the Conservatives would do differently, because the one thing that the leader of your party has been explicit on is that it would tie money from the federal government to provinces or municipalities to their ability to get homes built. That is explicitly, it feels like to me, through the last week of announcements, what the federal government is now doing. Why are you opposed to that?
They're not doing that, Vassy, because what they're not doing in any of these announcements is ensuring that local gatekeepers stop putting up barriers to new homes coming on the market. That's the critical piece here. We've got study after study that shows that local red tape, delays in planning, the lengthy time periods it takes to get permits for builders, all of that adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of a new home. It keeps those existing home prices high, and it prevents new units from coming on to the market. So rather than borrowing billions and billions of dollars, keeping interest rate high for all Canadians, what Conservatives are saying is incentivize those municipalities directly by rewarding the cities that get those barriers out of the way, get new units built with extra funds for infrastructure, tie those infrastructure dollars to more density around transit stations so that there are more units being built right where people can access ways of getting around the city. None of the Trudeau government's announcements contain any of that. It's all recycled, repackaged programs that have been proven not to work.
Look, and I'm not disagreeing, I'm not absolving the government of responsibility for where things are at right now. And you could certainly hear that in my line of questioning to Mr. Biddle. But everything that you just laid out, for example, freezing development fees, agreeing to high density around transit, all of that stuff is explicitly tied to the funding that they are offering provinces through the new programs that they're announcing. It is exactly what the Conservatives had asked for.
No, what we're talking about is directly linking the existing program dollars for municipalities to taking those barriers down. And also recognizing that for those municipalities that don't do that, that there will be consequences for that. That's not in these announcements too. And most of the big dollar amounts, Justin Trudeau is trying to razzle-dazzle Canadians with these big dollar amounts, recycled programs that have already been proven not to work. 11,000 homes after a $25 billion announcement, 11,000 homes after 8 years, that's not a track record to be proud of. And it's not a sign that the government should double down on the same policies. What Canadians should take away from this week's announcements is that with Justin Trudeau, all he's offering Canadians is more of the same policies that started the crisis in the first place.
Ms. Kwan, I want to make sure and get you in this conversation. The leader of your party wrote today on social media this about the government's announcement. Bad news for Poilievre and his rich real estate friends. New Democrats have forced the government to protect affordable rental units with a rental protection fund. This will mean more affordable rent and less profits for big corporate landlords. Aren't landlords, be they corporate or otherwise, needed in order to restore affordability for people who rent. And what I mean by that is we need supply. The CMHC explicitly said this right now in their forecast. Demand is far outstripping supply. Why are you choosing to demonize corporations or other landlords who are contributing or aiming to contribute to that supply?
Well, I think one thing we need to point out is that the reason why we're in a housing crisis that we're faced with today is because the successive Liberal and Conservative governments have actually stopped building co-op housing and social housing 30 years ago. And 30 years later, they have heavily relied on the private sector to provide the kind of housing that people need. And turns out we have this crisis. The private sector has not been able to deliver the housing that people need, housing that they can afford. So what the NDP has put forward, what the leader has put forward is to force the government to come forward with housing measures that can make a difference. The Rental Protection Fund is one big piece. And however, the announcement today is a small component. It's basically loans in the amount of $1 billion, primarily for the nonprofit sector. Just yesterday, the government made an announcement on loans for $15 billion for private developers. So hence you can see the difference. It's true, we need more rental housing. Absolutely. We need the private sector working with us. Absolutely. But what we also need is for the government to ensure that rental housing that's developed is actually affordable to people. Right now, as it stands, the average rent in Vancouver is about $2,500 a month. It is not feasible. And if you don't put those necessary conditions in place, you will not solve the housing crisis. In addition to that, you do have the private sector buying up rental housing, the lower cost housing stock, and then displacing people. This rental eviction situations has happened significantly, and people are losing their homes. That's what our leader is talking about, to say that this cannot be allowed. These corporate landlords cannot be allowed to displace people, and for the government to allow to continue to allow this to happen.
Right. And Ms. Kwan, I'm not excusing the practice, but can you quantify the degree to which that is impacting the overall issue of sky-high record historic rents? Because the CMHC, in their analysis, pointed to the simple equilibrium between supply and demand. There is way too much demand and there is too little supply. And I'll circle back to my original question to Mr. Biddle. If supply takes a decade to come online, are you prepared, for example, to look at trying to force the government to reduce immigration levels? I know that they're already looking at the temporary side, but need they look at the permanent side as well?
Well, let me just look at the numbers that you asked the question. How many units have we lost? Actually, under the Conservatives, by the way, under the Harper administration with Poilievre at that table, Canada lost 800,000 units of affordable housing under their watch. Under the Liberals' watch, we lost 370,000. That's over 1 million units of housing, affordable housing that the community needed. And now the government's talking about building, 10,000 here, another 10,000 there, and so on and so forth. For every unit that they build, we lose 10 or 11. That is the rate of loss. So until we stem the loss, the rate of loss on affordable housing, we're always going to be doing catch up. We're not going to be able to address.
But don't we have to look at demand?
Well, we have to look at demand, but I have to say this, though. Both the Liberals and Conservatives heavily relied on migrant workers. They brought in more migrant workers over time. Instead of permanent residents, they relied on temporary migrant workers who did not have full status and took advantage, and they were taken advantage of. They were abused by employers. Many of them suffer greatly. This happened under the Liberals and the Conservatives. And now we're in a housing crisis. And what they want to do, they want to blame.
My question was about the levels.
And this is not the way to deal with the housing crisis. What you need is for the government to build social housing, co-op housing. We need to increase our stock from 3.5% to at least the G7 average, which is 7%. We need to make sure housing that is built that's affordable for people and not to benefit the private developers. There are a number of different measures that needs to be in place. And what the NDP is pushing for the government to do is to build the housing that Canadians need.
I have to leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I do appreciate all of you making the time for the discussion tonight. Thank you so much. Parliamentary Secretary to the Housing Minister, Chris Biddle, the Conservatives' House Leader, Andrew Scheer, and the NDP's housing critic, Jenny Kwan.